Hey everyone! Today I'm going to be talking about Prismacolor colored pencils, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to be using this drawing of a watermelon as an example. The things I'll be talking about will work for any wax-based pencils, but in this example, I'm only using Prismacolor colored pencils, and they're a very popular option of colored pencils, so I figured I'll just make the whole video based on that. But don't let the brand name of the colored pencil stick in your head too much. The tips and stuff I'm going to be saying are easily applied to any wax-based pencils, and these are just the brand that I have. I personally think that it's amazing what colored pencils are capable of. When you see one of those stunning, realistic drawings, and somebody tells you that it's done with colored pencils, I just never think that that's possible with colored pencils. Because when I initially think of them, I think of like grade school colored pencils, where you put it on the page and you see the white of the page like straight through it, and it just looks all cheesy. So it really is amazing to know what they're capable of sometimes. And I had a really hard time reaching that amazing solid color point that everybody is so used to with colored pencils. So the question is, how do you get there? How do you make your drawings with colored pencils look so photorealistic and have the shades so dark and not see-through? Well, it's pretty tricky to figure out, but I can help you. So when I use colored pencils, the first thing I put down is a base layer. This is a really light shade of whatever color I'm working towards, and the lightest shade that I'll be doing. So say that I'm using red, just like this example. I have 3 colored pencils of red that I'm using for the different shades and values of this watermelon, but I'll be using the lightest shade just to put down the base value. Then I'll kind of map out the darker areas with a light shade of the shade that I'm going for. You can see that on the red part of the watermelon I have little circles of the darker pieces, and that'll be blended out later, but it's just so I know where to put it as I keep layering. At this point of the process, I use a colorless blender pencil, and I just go over the washes of color, and then keep adding more layers of color, and then blend it out, and then more layers, and blend it out, and I just keep going until I like the way it looks. When I reach the final layer, I'll burnish with my colored pencil, and then also burnish with a blender on top of it. This way, there are absolutely no spots where the white of the paper shows through. And even though this paper that I'm working on in the example is toned gray, you still don't want those little spots to show through your color. In addition, as I'm layering and using the blender pencil to kind of burnish over it, I'm also blending in the darker shades of red with the lighter shades of red. In the beginning, I had just distinct little circles that showed me where the darkest points were and the lightest points were. But as the layers keep going on, I'm layering midtones in between so that the colors blend in evenly with each other, and this is the point where the drawing starts to look realistic. In case the vocab just happened to slip your mind a little bit, midtones are all the shades in between the darkest shade and the lightest shade. By putting down your midtones, it makes blending out the darkest shades and the lightest shades easier and look more natural. Then for my highlights in this drawing, I just used a white colored pencil and put it straight over all the red. This way, it comes out as like a pinky tone instead of just straight up white. The next step in this drawing was a little bit of a cheat. The piece of the watermelon in between the red parts and the green parts was straight white in my reference, so I just burnished the white colored pencil right over that area. I skipped the layering, I skipped everything. Since I wasn't blending anything, it was straight up white. Then for the green part of the watermelon, I started by mapping out the highlights using the white colored pencil first. The highlights in my reference picture were very prominent and very white, so I wanted to map them out from the beginning to make sure that I wouldn't go over them by accident with dark green or anything like that. So for this part of the drawing, I only ended up using 2 different shades of green, one darker and one lighter. They blended out together very nicely, so I didn't end up needing any midtones or anything like that. This part of the watermelon ended up being a bit easier than the red part, because there was less shades to blend out together. But I still did use the same layering technique, I just used less layers, since there was less to blend. But everything besides that is exactly the same as the red part. Layering, burnishing with the blender pencil, and layering more. I use this method throughout the entire drawing, since watermelon are very flat in color. But some people don't use this method because a lot of people don't like using the colorless blender pencil. They say that once you layer it down on your drawing, it's harder to layer more on top of it, since it's just a waxy overcoating. But I like the way that it makes the drawing look. Even though it gives it a very waxy texture, you can still layer a bit over that, and I use this technique all the time, and I've had no problems with it. So although it's a little bit controversial with the blender pencil, I think it's worth a shot. And if you don't like it, you don't like it. You can still burnish your drawings without using a blender pencil. You can just burnish it with the color that you're using. For example, in the green parts, I could just use the green colored pencils to burnish on top of themselves. I don't need the blender pencil over top of it. But I like using the blender pencil since it also blends between the colors. It just makes it easier for me. This is especially helpful on the outside of the watermelon in the green part, where the darker green areas seem to pool out into the light green areas. It's much easier for me to blend between those two colors using the blender pencil, since they are pretty different in shade. Overall, this was a pretty simple drawing. The only reason that it took so long for me to do was because it required a lot of layers to get the flat, shiny color that watermelon are. But it was nice and simple since I only used a few colors, and I used the same blending technique throughout the entire thing. For the red pieces, I used 3 or 4 shades of red, 1 black colored pencil for the seeds, white for the highlights, and then the green parts I only used 2 different pencils. So it was on the simpler side. It just took about 2 hours because of all the layering and burnishing that had to be put into it. However, it was definitely all worth it in the end. Once I was done, all the colors were blended out nice and evenly, the shades had their nice mid-tones, and everything looked great. I did think that it came out looking quite realistic, especially once I added the shadow at the end, which you'll see coming up soon. And the shadow was nice and simple too, to add to our nice simple drawing. It was just a little bit of charcoal and then a little bit of graphite that I blended out with a blending stump. It was nothing fancy, nothing that took a long time. In fact, I think the shadow only took 5 minutes to do, and that was just because I screwed it up a little bit in the beginning and had to clean it up with an eraser. But everything about this drawing was nice and simple, and I loved the way that it turned out. The only thing that was complicated was how long it took, and I wouldn't even say that was complicated, that was just maybe the only downside of it. But all my drawings take me a pretty long time, regardless of what the drawing actually is. In fact, I could say this drawing was on the shorter side, which makes perfect sense considering the fact that I keep calling it simple. But this is also a nice example of the fact that you don't need a lot of colors to create nice drawings. A lot of people are on a budget with their art supplies and they can't afford those giant packs of 100 and whatever colored pencils. But in this drawing, I only ended up using 10-ish colored pencils. And I still think it came out pretty nice, so don't worry about the quantity of your pencils or the quality, as long as you have something that can put down color. The same layering and blending technique will work out just fine. And this is also a way of showing that you really don't need to obsess over having a million midtones just to get that perfect blend. Because you only need 1 or 2, or sometimes even none with the green, to get that nice blended out effect. Because I know that a lot of people use a ton of midtones in between their darkest and their lightest to try to get the most realistic transition possible. But don't overdo it, you know? You don't need as many as you think. And this is also just one of the ways that I'm most comfortable with using colored pencils. There's a ton of different ways and techniques out there, so if this one doesn't suit you, I'm certain there's another one out there for you. So, with that being said, I hope you guys found this video at least a little bit helpful, and I do hope that you learned at least one thing from this video as well. So, thank you guys all so much for watching, and I really hope to see you in the next video.